Its surface blazes brightly, masking shadows below. Hello, and welcome to the Expanse. I'm H the Quack, and I hope you're having a less quack day than myself. Today we are going to be talking about World of Warcraft's God of the Sun, Archie, and his seeming absence in the World of Warcraft universe, and why it's important. We're doing this because, for me at least, the hints that something big is coming in relation to the Sun is so blatant, I can't ignore them anymore. Also, when I say big, by the way, I mean a threat that will probably eclipse the Legion and lore reveals that will be on par with the Chronicles. Also, for reference, this is what happens when something that should have only taken a day turns into sticking your head in the pond for over a week. This whole theory is beyond quacked. So, technically, all of this begins with the Tour of Mythology, one of the oldest, by IRL standards, references to the creation of Azeroth. A set of myths that, for the most part, contradict everything we know about early Azeroth. To what extent these myths contradict our current knowledge comes down to when you think these stories took place. However, some of the implied facts within the text will always raise an eyebrow. Example being the Tauren myths imply the Tauren, Shahalo, have been around since the first days of Azeroth, as in pre-Black Empire and pre-Reign of the Elements. The aspect of the Tauren myths we're going to be focusing on today is Archie, the Sun, one of the eyes of the Earth Mother, Azeroth, and brother to Alud, who is specifically venerated by the Seers and Sunwalkers within Tauren society, and is said to ensure the dawn every morning by bleeding his light into the sky with the help of the Yine. The notion Alud has a brother who is assumedly as powerful as her is a very interesting notion in of itself. Here's the question though. Why is his presence seemingly absent from Azeroth in comparison to his sister? I mean, just as an example, there are a plethora of locations that have strong, known, and obvious connections to the moon. In comparison, Archie has 2 locations, which have only recently been added/explained. One of these places is the field of Archie in High Mountain, introduced in Legion. The other is Sunrock Retreat, in Stone Talon Mountain. According to legends, Archie kissed the mountain range of the retreat. There is also the fact Archie is only referenced in one of the older Tauren myths. No other species on Azeroth seems to acknowledge Archie or the existence of a sun deity, even though the sun basically shares the same rotation as the moon, which overall is foundationally strange. Even druids from multiple cultures that use lunar and solar powers do not seem to reference the sun. So, are the Tauren myths wrong? And is there no deity of the sun? Or was Archie conveniently forgotten about by every species on Azeroth? I don't think either happened. I think it's more likely Archie and references to a deity of the sun were stricken from the history of Azeroth. The questions are, why? Is there proof of it? And how will this play into the coming story of World of Warcraft? This is where a very long list of relevant lore starts to form our knowledge of the sun, and where this theory begins. The list starts with the Cataclysm. In Cataclysm, we are introduced to Uldum, a Titan facility that had been hinted at back in Vanilla through the discs of Norgannon and Uldaman. At the time, Uldum was odd. We had just walked the halls of Ulduar in Wrath, so everyone had a general idea of what to expect from Titan architecture. Uldum blew that out of the water. On top of this, we had the Watchers of Uldum, who were not only animal-headed giants similar to the Anubiseth we had seen in AQ, but were also related to rather odd notions of magic and what they encompassed. The Watchers respectively represented magic, chaos, life, and the sun. Now, considering what we're talking about, Raj, the construct of the sun, was an interesting reveal. A falcon/eagle-headed humanoid being chosen to represent the sun is quite an obvious nod to the Egyptian god Ra, or Horus depending on your take, but most likely Ra in this case. And where this is important, what's initially interesting about these Watchers is that trying to equate them to the Titans we know of is a nightmare that doesn't really work. Trust me, I've tried. This is rather odd considering almost all Watchers on Azeroth, except the ones in Uldum, were made to reflect the Titans, raising the question, why are they different, and are these Watchers supposed to reflect something else? This is where a very, very subtle difference in Uldum's layout starts to become incredibly important. If you've been flying around Uldum, you've probably noticed these statues everywhere. Or have you noticed these ones? Yes, there are 2 different bird statues in Uldum, and yes, they are that important. Why? Well, let's start with the most common statue. The most common statue in Uldum is that of the Raven/Crow. And yes, I am certain it is either one or the other, and I will eventually explain why. During the original quests in Uldum, this raven is quite noticeable. As the quests of Uldum take you around the Obelisk of the Stars, it becomes clear there are at least 2 geographical markers associated with the raven, other than the raven statue. The first are the massive raven motifs carved into the walls of Uldum. The second are the raven obelisks that have an identical motif to the walls, and are specifically topped off with turquoise pyramids, which have unique designs carved into them. It should also be noted, these designs are distinct in comparison to the main obelisks of Uldum. The places of note the raven appears are the Obelisk of the Stars, Nahom, just south of the Obelisk of the Stars, an unnamed shrine just east of the Lost Sea of Tolvir on the southern coast, inside the August Terrace within the Lost Sea of Tolvir, the Cradle of the Ancients at the southern base of the Obelisk of the Sun, where during Cataclysm we accessed the Cradle of Promise, which contained the Titan discs used to activate the Halls of Origination, as well as the power to bring life to the desolate area. Fun fact, whoever redid Uldum overlooked that event, and reverted the area back to its arid state. This was even done for those who went through the entire questline of Uldum, which saw adventurers activate all the obelisks to gain access to the Cradle of Promise in the first place. The other notable places the raven appears is on the western base of the Obelisk of the Sun, in what seems to be a side entrance, inside the Forge of Origination, which, as you start the dungeon, seems to heavily imply the raven has something to do with the engine, and, most importantly, the Obelisk of the Moon, which out of all of the locations appears to be dedicated to the raven. This brings us to the Falcon/Hawk. On the outset, the Falcon statues in Uldum seem to be ornaments, and that's it. However, when you start to realize where these statues turn up and what they're connected to, a lot of questions start to appear. Shrines to the Falcon turn up in Ramkahet, the Lost City of Tolvir, and Neferset. So the implication here is the Tolvir know or at least acknowledge whatever this Falcon is. However, in comparison to the Raven, the Falcon scarcely appears outside and only in localized positions. The Falcon only appears outside in Neferset, the northern peak of the Obelisk of the Sun, the base of the northern ascent to the top of the Obelisk of the Moon, Orsis, the ruins of King Tasset, over the Obelisk of the Moon, specifically outside the Temple of Uldum, in Uldum, and just outside the Lost City of Tolvir. Now, the position of the Falcon in relation to the Obelisk of the Sun confirms something that wasn't very hard to put together. These Falcons are probably related to the Sun, and in turn, Watcher Raj. What the positioning of these Falcons also do is show a distinct separation between the Raven and the Falcon. Rarely do both appear in the same location, and even if they do, one is usually more predominant than the other. The only exceptions to that rule are the ruins of King Tasset, above the Obelisk of the Moon, prior to the Akia moving in and removing them, and the Lost City of Tolvir. During Cataclysm, we defeated an Obsidian Colossus/Destroyer that had the head of a falcon within the ruins. The Destroyer was surrounded by Falcon statues it appeared to have control over. The Destroyer was also activated by one of the crystals that were used to save the life of Assyrian the Asgard from AQ, but I'll go back to him later. The main point here is, for some reason, one of the only places the Raven and the Falcon coexist is above the Obelisk of the Moon, in a ruin where the Raven seems to guard both sides of both doors, a place that in the past and present was used to create different types of Obsidian Destroyers. The other place the Raven and the Falcon seemingly exist is in the Lost Sea of Tolvir. In the Warlord's Terrace, there is a shrine to the Falcon guarded by two, assumedly, Ivory Watchers. While in the August Terrace, keep that name in mind, there are Raven statues looking over the area. The definition of an Augur, I might add, is a religious official who observed natural signs, especially the behaviour of birds, interpreting these actions as indications of divine approval or disapproval of proposed actions. Synonyms for Augur are seer, prophet, oracle, sage, diviner. What's intriguing about the birds coexisting in the Lost City is that the third boss of the dungeon, Prophet Barim, is one of the few bosses in Cataclysm that had relation to the birds. Barim specifically calls upon the powers of a phoenix and a dark phoenix, and upon his death says the famous line, "Death is only the beginning." Also, if you played during Cataclysm, I'm almost certain you remember the seemingly out-of-place additions of the normal and dark Firehawk mounts, as well as the dark Phoenix mount, which at the time were highly coveted and difficult to acquire. What was odd about them was, other than Barim, Alreza and Raj to an extent, their additions had little to no connection to the expansion, especially when you say compared them to the Drakes of the Winds mounts that were also added in Cataclysm. It should also be noted, the Pure Blood Firehawk flavor text reads as follows. Legends state that the Pure Blood line may be traced back to the very creation of the Firelands, implying the Firehawks were on Azeroth, at the very least during the fall of the Black Empire, if not longer, meaning their presence on Azeroth could quite easily predate the Titans. Now, if you're wondering how all of this relates to the theory, let me just make this perfectly clear first. We have a raven that is seemingly related to the stars and the moon, and a falcon that is seemingly related to the sun. Now, the general assumption about Uldum is the notion that the Tol'vir designed everything in reverence to the Titanic Watchers in the Halls of Origination. The idea is, statues like the falcon are worshipped in reverence of Raj and the Titanic Watchers. It's a reasonable assumption considering the Tol'vir are Titan forged and the Halls of Origination was created by the Titans. However, what if I told you that was wrong? What if I told you, similar to the question I asked earlier, the Watchers of Uldum, similar to the Watchers on Azeroth, are made to reflect something. Something that was. Something greater than the Watchers, and something the Titans couldn't ignore. You see, Uldum and the surrounding ruins, in of themselves, contradict the Watchers in the Halls of Origination being the true deities of the Tol'vir, whether the Tol'vir know it or not, and instead hint that, like the other statues throughout Uldum, the Watchers are designed to be in reverence of something greater, albeit designed by a different civilization. The first dead giveaway this is the case is the Raven, and its seeming absence amongst the Uldum Watchers. Why? Well, there is a lot I need to go through before I can get to the line of logic I know you've probably already put together, so unfortunately I'll just say this for now. In Uldum, the Raven is attached to the moon and the stars. Yet, when you enter the Halls of Origination, there is only one Watcher that matches that description. That Watcher is Isa Set, the Watcher of Magic, the only Titan-looking Watcher in Uldum. The only Watcher that has 3 statues in all of Uldum. One at the entrance of Uldum, another at the entrance of the Halls of Origination, and the last in the Lost City of Tol'vir, seemingly placed within her own garden. And she is the only Watcher to actively hide her ears. Couple this with the fact that 8.3 has confirmed the Obelisk of the Stars can be used to ascend creatures to a Titan-like status. The Engine of Nalek Shah previously proved the Titans can alter the forms of these stars, and the constellation Corvus, the Raven, also just happens to be in the Ulduar Forges. It's not that much of a stretch to figure out what happened to the Raven. The joke is, there is more supporting evidence to this that I will touch on later. In the meantime, the second dead giveaway Uldum provides, that implies the Watchers were based off creatures before them, is a location called the Tomb of the Precursors, where you can seemingly find tombs dedicated to each of the animals except the falcon. This concept in of itself makes no sense in relation to the Titan Forged. We know the Tol'vir were Titan Forged, implying when they came south, they apparently quote-unquote built Uldum and the prison of Thun. So, for there to be the tombs of the precursors means those tombs have to be old, as in Black Empire old or older. And where the argument could be made, the precursors were the Tol'vir present before Uldum was re-originated, thanks to archaeology and the Castle of Sand, we know that is not likely the case. The Castle of Sand implies the buildings in the area of the tomb of the precursors are old enough that not even the Tol'vir, who have been locked away in the region for millennia, have the basic plans or techniques to create or maintain the buildings. Not mentioning the fact that, once again, these castles of sand also just happen to appear in the Lost Sea of Tol'vir. and where the obvious answer to all of this is the Tol'vir are just a reverse Titanforged species from the Black Empire, as the underlying design of Uldum quite literally looks like a Black Empire capital repurposed by the Titanforged. That answer also quickly makes little to no sense, because most of the buildings in Uldum are dedicated to the sun. Not a dark sun, I might add, a quite bright and vibrant sun, a thing the Shadow is quite obviously not a fan of. Though, that's not mentioning the basic fact there is no way the Titans would create watches in the image of the old gods. Though I don't even really need to mention that either, because none of the watches look like the old gods anyway. All of this leaves a big question mark above Uldum, as it implies something as old as the Black Empire, or at least something old enough to mimic their architecture consistently, was around during the early days of Azeroth. The question is, who or what? This brings us to Osirian the Unscarred, who is more of a sun reference than Raj. Now, Osirian was an Anubiseth, as in a jackal-faced giant Anubiseth. After being the first Anubiseth to bring down a dragon during the War of the Shifting Sands, Osirian was changed as he nearly died bringing down the dragon that was slain. This change resulted in his current form. Now, this type of transformation occurring to minions of the old gods is nothing new. There's just one very odd thing about Osirian's transformation. Osirian looks nothing like an old god minion. As in, whatever Sethun and the Twin Emperors did to Osirian was not of the Shadow. They turned an Anubiseth into a hawk-headed giant that looks like it was made to revere the sun, with crystals that are described as being of distant origin. That's it. The only other time a crystal like that turns up in WoW is, as I mentioned, when we fight a falcon-headed obsidian colossal / destroyer in Cataclysm. So, not only are these crystals incredibly rare, they also seem to have connections to the sun, the falcon / hawk, and the ability to alter a creature's form to look like a falcon / hawk. The reason this is important is that it should get you thinking about how the Titans created the forms of Raj and the other Watchers in Uldum. But more importantly, it should get you thinking about when and where these crystals are from and why they have such an effect. The Titans may have used these crystals, but to our knowledge, the Titans used the Forges to create the Watchers. So if the crystals were used by the Titans, they would have assumedly served a different purpose than transforming Titanforged. But what this still doesn't explain is the properties of the transformation, as in why a falcon / hawk. As for the old gods and the Black Empire, it seems as if they know how to use the crystals similar to the Titans, but once again the effects don't match the entities. Once again, why a falcon / hawk? The only solid connection these crystals have to anything on Azeroth is the result of their effect, which connects them to the falcon / hawk and the sun. The implication here is, similar to the Tomb of the Precursors, these crystals and their effect might date back or predate the Titans' interference on Azeroth, if not the Black Empire as well, in turn implying the existence of an old creature a Titan construct like Raj may have been built to reflect. This is further implied by Tanaris. World of Warcraft has few areas that from vanilla have never been changed. South Tanaris is one of those locations. Other than the addition of NPCs and a slight change of map proportions to ensure the Uldum entrance could fit, South Tanaris has remained relatively the same. This area is important because of the South Moon and East Moon ruins just north of the Valley of the Watchers. These ruins are troll ruins, but, as the name suggests, these ruins are dedicated to the moon, which, for the Faraki, who were technically jungle trolls considering their heritage, is very, very weird. As in, yes, there are the Lunalize and Adlari, but for the most part, they are an outlier in troll society that have little sway. There could be an argument made that these ruins once belonged to the Dark Trolls, who eventually became Night Elves, but if the maps of early Azeroth are correct, then Tanaris was controlled by the Gurubashi Jungle Trolls. So, as extreme outliers go, these ruins fit the bill. These ruins lead to an interesting implication surrounding the Faraki Trolls of Tanaris and their pantheon. You see, the Faraki in comparison to the other major troll tribes are severely lacking in lore, as in we have Moisala, Kimball, and Shadra, and technically Gazrilla, though as Yasma implied, the worship of the Hydra in normal troll society is heavily looked down upon. Seemingly, it is something specific to the Faraki and heretics like the followers of Xul. Either way, the Faraki pantheon for a tribe that occupies Xul is extraordinarily small, a fact which fundamentally has never made any sense. I mean, even though the Faraki are technically an offshoot of the Gurubashi, they were never as small as, say, the Darkspear or any of the other offshoot tribes. So their pantheon shrinking due to numbers doesn't make much sense, and neither does their location being too remote for worship, as worship of the lower is practically universal. So the question becomes, what happened to the lower of the Faraki? Well, assuming South Moon and East Moon ruins were once occupied by the Faraki, and in turn the Faraki at some point had temples dedicated to the worship of the moon, then the Raven/Crow being an entity the Faraki worshipped would make a lot of sense considering their proximity to the Valley of the Watchers and Uldum. This would also explain why the Faraki and Traveller had a method of using the moon to summon dark versions of Kimball and Shadra, as well as Moisala. It also just happens that if you add the Jackal, the Ram, the Falcon, and the Crocodile, if you really want to push it, on top of the Raven, the Faraki pantheon starts to look a lot more complete. Here's the icing on the cake though. Zul'Gurub is just adjacent to Karazhan. Now, thanks to Lhok from Shinies and Lucydos, I've known for ages that if you attempt to translate an IRL meaning out of Karazhan, one of the more interesting translations you can pull from the word is Karasu, which means raven in Japanese. Now, as translations go, that fits the theme of Karazhan very well. The reason we're paying attention to this though is thanks to the Deadwind Harvester and the information we learn about it in Legion, we know that before the Harvester scoured what would become known as the Deadwind Pass, there was a heavy troll presence in the area. We don't know what they were doing in the area, but considering everything I've just been through with the Faraki, it wouldn't be that surprising if the Gurubashi at some point worshipped the Raven as well. There is also the fun fact that the Falcon, or more precisely the Eagle, is already a part of the oddest troll pantheon out there, the Armani pantheon. And where a Killzone, the Armani Eagle Lower, doesn't have a direct connection to the sun, and instead a connection to lightning, it is intriguing how the Armani also have the fire-based Dragonhawk Lower, Janali. I should also note now, the Wild Gods are a pantheon of Lower that were specifically bound to the Emerald Dream. Freya, the Keeper of Aeonar, specifically chose the Lower that would become the Wild Gods. Where at present there is no solid proof the other keepers took such an action with another set of Lower, for the rest of this theory I would highly suggest keeping in mind that one of the other keepers may have done so. Overall, this possible connection to the Faraki pantheon once again gives us a plausible creature the constructs of Uldum may have been designed to reflect, while also expanding the possible presence of these deities outside of Uldum. If you're also curious why I did mention Zuldrak or Zandalar, it's not because they don't have anything to do with this theory, it's actually quite the opposite. It's just that when I get to a certain part of this theory and introduce Zuldrak and Zandalar, if you know your lore, all of this is going to click really fast. So until then, the last thing that implies the Watchers of Uldum are not the gods of Uldum, or that which Uldum is dedicated to, is the Amentet. You see, the minute the Amentet come out of stasis and find Raj and the other Watchers dead, instead of the typical mixture of dismay, reverence and anger you'd expect from worshippers of a faith knowing their literal deities are dead, the Amentet instead display a near total lack of respect for their supposed gods, and instead attempt to build their own Watchers and replace them, touting loyalty to the Titans and notions the Titans' plans must be followed. This implies the Amentet and assumedly the other Tol'vir know the Watchers are tools, constructs which may have been given personalities and great purpose by the Titans, but at the end of the day are still completely replaceable. Now, what's interesting about this is that where the Watchers may get that type of treatment, the non-statues don't. In actuality, they get the complete opposite. Above the tombs of the Amentet in an area called the Sunstone Terrace, of all the names I am going to ask you to remember that name, Sunstone Terrace. In 8.3, a new addition was added to the area. That addition was a shrine to the Falcon created by the Amethet. What's interesting is a broken pillar of the Raven was also added, specifically set in a way that makes it look like the Amethet defaced the pillar and replaced it with the Falcon Shrine. Couple this with the fact the Amethet's pets are sun-touched falcons, and they are using sun pillars, topped with the very sun pyramids that had been sparsely scattered around Uldum since Cataclysm, and almost match every mimicked sun pyramid top in Uldum, the writing on the wall seems to be pretty obvious. Even though the Amethet are quite obviously Titanforged and zealously loyal to the Titan's plans, the Amethet also have a connection to the Falcon and the Sun, and treat the Falcon and the Raven more like gods than the Watchers. On top of this, considering the constant references to the Sun everywhere in Uldum, yet the seeming prevalence of the Raven and lack of the Falcon, the implication here seems to be there was a shift in worship from both to one to seemingly neither, leaving the very big questions of who or what, when, and why. Thank you for watching.